It seems like nobody stays put anymore. But then, they never did. When it comes to the US, our country is built on people moving from one place to another, searching for better circumstances, and in the process altering the complexion of landscapes, cultures, languages, and economies. The earliest migrations, of course, were by native peoples. Much later, in the 1600s, people seeking freedom from religious persecution crossed the Atlantic from England. 200 years later, more than 25 million people came to the US from Europe and Britain in search of economic prospects that didn't exist in their homelands. For 20 years, beginning in the 1930s, more than 2.5 million desperate people abandoned their homes and farms. The 1-2 punch of extreme drought in the southern plains and the staggering economic effects of the Great Depression forced rural families out. The last Great Migration took place from 1916 to 1970, when more than 6 million African Americans left the rural South to move north and west. All of these migrations share some things in common: people experiencing hardship and desperation, moving for better religious and economic opportunities. Historians have given some personal breadth and depth to migrations in the 20th century. For example, Tom Jones wrote a 2-volume work based on oral histories that takes us into the experiences of Haskell and Florence Jones as they took part in the Great Migration. In 1920, they moved from Graves County, Kentucky to Akron, Ohio, hoping to benefit from the booming rubber industry, and in the process contributing to the swelling population of Akron. Between 1910 and 1960, when that city's economy hit its peak, Akron's population more than quadrupled. It grew from 69,000 to over 290,000 people, straining infrastructures in the city. Across the country, in a high Colorado mountain valley, Steamboat Springs was experiencing no such boom, but it was about to. Routt County, where Steamboat is located, sits snug up against Wyoming to the north and is only 1 county away from Utah to the west. Although the Yampa River Valley is only 6,700 feet high, the peaks in the Park Range to the east serve as the perfect backstop for winter storms moving from the Pacific east across the Rockies. It's not uncommon for more than 30 feet of snow to land on this mountain range in a winter season. In 1910, the population of the town at the base of these mountains was just a little more than 1,200 souls, mostly ranchers, shopkeepers, and families of the original homesteading pioneers. There was also some coal mining in the county, small mines mostly. The railroad had just come through town in 1908, so now local products could get to market, and coal mining operations consolidated. In 1914, Norwegian Carl Howelsen introduced skiing and ski jumping as a sport to the locals. Before that, skiing was the only way to get around in the long winters. Soon a ski run and a ski jump were forged from the hill in downtown Steamboat Springs, and local kids flocked to the new sport. It took a few years, but by the late 1950s, 2 young men from local ranching families started eyeing Storm Peak, a mile or so east of town. 3,600 vertical feet of skiing must have looked pretty exciting compared to the 436 feet on offer in Steamboat Springs at the time. By the winter of 1960, John Fetcher and Jim Temple, along with other locals, had built their first lift. Steamboat Ski and Resort was born. Famous for its trademarked champagne powder, so deep and light and fluffy it tingles the nose, Steamboat was a remote secret. The closest big city was, and still is, Denver, 150 miles and 2 high mountain passes away. In the 60s, it would have taken 4 to 5 hours to drive there on 2-lane roads. It was no destination resort. Well into the 1960s, there was only 1 motel open in town in the winter months. It wasn't until 1968 that condominiums at the base area started to go in. The first gondola was installed in 1970. For years, a busy day was 300 to 400 people skiing, mostly local kids, but some came from Wyoming and Fort Collins, just a few hours' drive away. In 1948, a third child was born to a family of Polish heritage in northeastern South Dakota. Michael grew up on his family's farm without running water. He went to a one-room schoolhouse where he was the only child in his class. When he was in second grade, his dad had a farming accident and moved the family to Minneapolis. After high school, he apprenticed as a bricklayer. Mike was athletic. He played softball and tennis, water skied. But he was the only one in his family who took to snow skiing in Minnesota on 500-foot vertical hills covered in ice, and he loved it. In 1968, when he was 19 years old, he got a taste of the Rocky Mountains when a friend's father invited him along on a family ski trip to Aspen. Every year after that, he found a way to get back to Colorado to ski. In 1971, he rode that new gondola at the Steamboat Springs ski area and took this photo of the undeveloped, expansive Yampa Valley floor. As a young bricklayer, there was a lot of work in the Twin Cities, but confident of his skills at the age of 23, Mike was more interested in something else, the wide open skies and the mountains of the West. Newly married, in search of a dream, he and his wife packed up and moved 1,100 miles to Steamboat Springs in 1972, without jobs, without a home. Mike and his wife were part of a cohort of people who moved to Steamboat in the early days of this new ski area, just as the town's population took a dramatic turn upwards. Between 1910 and 1930, Steamboat's population hovered right around 1,200 people. Over the next 30 years, about 650 were added to the census rolls. In 1960, Steamboat's population was just under 1,900. Then things really took off. By 1970, Steamboat grew by 500 more people. By 1980, there were nearly 2,800 more residents. This small mountain town's population nearly tripled between 1960 and 1980. There was room to grow in that wide valley. Mike soon became a masonry contractor and a real estate developer, forever changing the landscape of the area. He and his wife raised 2 children in those mountains. His son took over the business and is now a highly regarded stonemason, building multi-million-dollar homes in the area. His daughter, a former collegiate ski racer, is an operating room nurse. 3 granddaughters were born and raised in the valley. Mike chased a dream and found his pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There are a lot of others just like Michael and his family. Where did all those 3,300 people come from who nearly tripled the town's population between 1960 and 1980? Anecdotally, we know that many came from the Midwest, some from California. But who were they, and why did they leave their homes to forge a new life somewhere unknown? And what contributions did they make to history in the Yampa Valley? A good deal has been written about the original pioneers of the communities in and around Steamboat, but very little has been done to record the memories of people who moved here during the early years of the ski area. Experiences like Mike's that seem so commonplace today will be gone when these people are no longer living. And most of these folks are in their late 60s and older. Before we can't, it's time to collect their stories.